It felt like a story someone might tell years later, sitting beside a campfire, recalling the kind of day that changes something inside you without warning. Sandra and Keanu rode across the open desert with the warm wind pressing against their jackets, and the world stretched so far ahead it felt like time itself slowed down just to let them breathe. Sandra rode a little ahead, letting the golden light wash over her face as if she had been waiting for this moment of calm. She had been holding in so much lately, silent worries, small disappointments, the usual weight she didn't speak about. Out here with no cameras, no noise, no expectations, she felt like she was finally releasing something that had been stuck in her chest for weeks. The desert made everything feel honest. Even her own breath sounded like they meant something again. Keanu followed close, his bike steady, his presence familiar in the way safety can feel without ever being spoken out loud. He watched Sandra with quiet attention, not hovering, not controlling, but noticing the little shifts, the way her shoulders relaxed when the wind pushed, the faint smile behind her visor whenever she felt free. He knew she needed this more than she admitted. They approached a long stretch where the sand glowed like fire under the sun, and Sandra slowed a little, letting the world open wider. She glanced back at Keanu, and he gave her a small nod, the kind that said, "Go ahead, take your moment." She smiled, easing into a rhythm of riding that felt almost spiritual. For a while there was only the low hum of engines and the soft rush of air. No tension, no walls, just two friends riding through silence that healed more than any words could. But the peace shifted when Sandra felt an unfamiliar vibration under her boots, faint at first, then unmistakably growing. She frowned and looked behind her, expecting empty road, but the far-off horizon began to blur with rising dust. It moved fast, spreading wider, carrying the deep, rolling sound of engines that did not belong to them. Keanu noticed it at the same moment she did. His posture changed, subtle but sure. Sandra lifted her visor slightly, her breath tightening as she scanned the shimmering heat behind them. Something was coming. Not just the wind. Not just another quiet moment. The desert, so peaceful seconds ago, began to tremble with the sound of approaching bikers, and Sandra felt her heartbeat quicken in a way she couldn't ignore. Sandra tightened her grip on the handlebars as the rumbling behind them grew clearer. The desert wind carried the sound in waves, rising and falling like warning signals. Keanu eased his speed, letting Sandra pull closer until their bikes moved side by side again. He didn't need to ask if she was uneasy. He could sense it in the quiet tension of her breath. A cloud of dust rose in the distance, shaping itself into multiple shadows weaving through each other. The sunlight flickered along chrome, helmets, and jackets. The bikers weren't just approaching, they were approaching fast, riding in a loose formation that looked more chaotic than friendly. Sandra swallowed hard, reminding herself that not every unexpected encounter meant danger. But the truth was simpler. Sometimes a peaceful moment breaks because the world decides it will. Keanu leaned slightly toward her, his voice steady through the helmet mic. "Stay close, you're all right." Those two words anchored her. He always knew how to make uncertainty feel manageable, like the ground beneath her wasn't shifting as much as she feared. The bikers reached them within seconds, scattering slightly as they passed. Two riders slowed on purpose, circling around Sandra and Keanu in a loose arc. Their engines growled low, teasing, as one rider flicked his visor up just enough to flash a smirk. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't respectful either. It was the kind of teasing that thrives on discomfort. Sandra breathed through it, trying to hold her composure. She hated the sensation of being watched for amusement, especially in a moment where she had finally felt free. She hoped they would pass and move on, but another rider drifted too close, his side mirror inches from her knee. Keanu noticed instantly. Without a single sharp motion, he adjusted his bike into the exact space the biker was trying to invade. It wasn't confrontational. It was controlled, intentional, a boundary placed with absolute calm. The biker jerked slightly in surprise and drifted back, losing his sense of superiority in an instant. Sandra exhaled shakily, grateful for the quiet shield Keanu always managed to create without ever raising his voice or losing control. The group circled once more, laughter echoing behind their helmets. Then, just as quickly as they surged in, most of them accelerated forward, leaving a trail of dust behind. Sandra allowed herself a breath of relief, expecting the moment to finally settle. But one biker didn't leave. He slowed beside her, visor lifting to reveal eyes that didn't match the earlier behavior, tired eyes, thoughtful eyes. He gestured for them to stop, lifting one hand in a sign that wasn't mocking at all. Sandra and Keanu exchanged a look. Keanu lifted his chin slightly, signaling he'd handle it, and they gradually rolled to a halt near a quiet stretch of desert road. The lone biker pulled up beside them, removing his helmet with a long exhale. "I'm sorry about them," he said, voice lower, more sincere. "They get carried away, too much ego, not enough sense." Sandra's surprise softened her fear. "It's okay," she said quietly, though the tremble in her voice made her honesty clear. The biker looked at her, then at Keanu, then back at the desert behind him. Something troubled flickered in his posture. "Listen, there's something ahead you should know about." Keanu straightened slightly. "What is it?" The biker hesitated, not for drama, but because he wasn't sure how to explain the weight sitting on his conscience. "There's a car broken down up the road. Someone tried waving us down, but—" He exhaled, ashamed. "We didn't stop. We thought it was nothing, but the guy, he didn't look good, and the woman with him looked terrified." Sandra felt her chest tighten. "Is he hurt?" The biker nodded slowly. "He collapsed. We should have stopped." He swallowed, guilt darkening his tone. "I came back because someone has to." Sandra and Keanu shared a moment of silent understanding, quiet, heavy, and decisive. "Show us where," Keanu said. The biker pointed toward the shimmering horizon. Sandra turned her bike toward the long stretch of road, feeling purpose replace fear. But the biker's next words landed heavier than the desert heat. "I think he might not have much time." Sandra felt a pulse of adrenaline cut through her as the biker's words settled into the space between them. The desert, moments ago wide and endless, suddenly felt like a narrow corridor guiding them toward something urgent. Keanu studied the biker with a calm, assessing gaze, the kind that searched not for drama but for truth. The man didn't flinch under the scrutiny. His shoulders sagged, his guilt too real to fake. "I should have stopped earlier," he murmured. He fell, and she kept waving, but the others just rode past. Sandra's heart folded in on itself. She had seen that kind of fear before, the kind that grows when hope keeps shrinking. Without another question, she turned her handlebars toward the horizon. "Let's go," she said softly, but her voice carried weight. Keanu gave the biker a grateful nod, then followed Sandra as she eased forward, her engine humming with new intention. The lone rider stayed behind for a moment, watching them leave, as if hoping this small act might balance something inside him. The desert road stretched ahead, shimmering with heat that twisted the air into illusions. Every minute felt too long. Sandra's breaths came tight and fast, her thoughts racing ahead of her bike. She imagined the woman's panic, the man's weakening pulse, the sun bearing down without mercy. She didn't want to imagine how long they'd been stranded. Keanu kept close, closer than before, their wheels almost aligned. He sensed the storm of worry spinning inside her, though she said nothing. "You're not alone," his voice came through the mic, not dramatic, not forced, just steady. It helped. After several tense minutes, a shape broke through the wavering air, a small car pulled to the side, hood up, door hanging open. Sandra's heart dropped. Even from a distance, something felt wrong. She accelerated without thinking, dust curling behind her tire. As they closed the gap, the scene sharpened painfully into focus. A woman stood beside the car, waving both arms with a desperation that cut straight through the sunlight. Her face was streaked with tears, her voice lost in the wind but unmistakably pleading. And beside her, on the sand, lay a man, unmoving, sprawled as if his strength had evaporated beneath the unbearable heat. Sandra braked so suddenly her back wheels skidded slightly. Before the bike even stilled, she leaped off, helmet still on, running toward the couple. The woman turned to her with a raw, cracked voice. "Please, please help him. He collapsed. He won't wake up. I didn't know what to do." Sandra fell to her knees beside the man, hands trembling as she checked his chest for movement. Relief hit her when she found the faint rise of breath, weak, shallow, but there. He's alive, she whispered, more to calm the woman than herself. Keanu knelt opposite her, already removing his gloves. His expression stayed steady, even though Sandra knew he felt the same tightening fear. He shifted the man gently, checking his pulse, shielding his face from the sun with his own shadow. The woman sobbed harder, her hands shaking uncontrollably. We were driving, the car overheated. He tried to fix it, then he just fell. Sandra looked up at her, her own voice soft but firm. You're not alone anymore, we're here. Keanu glanced at the horizon. The sun was lowering, but the heat still clung thick to the air. We need water, shade. He can't stay in the open. Sandra nodded. The urgency settled into her limbs, clear and focused. She scanned the road behind them for the biker who warned them, hoping he hadn't disappeared entirely. But then something unexpected happened. The distant hum of engines began again, soft at first, then unmistakable. Sandra lifted her head. Keanu's jaw tightened. The bikers were coming back. And this time, Sandra didn't know whether to be relieved or afraid. Sandra instinctively positioned herself closer to the unconscious man as the engines grew louder again. The woman beside her clutched her husband's hand, fear returning to her face as the dust cloud rolled toward them. Keanu rose slowly, not defensive, just ready, his calmness a strange anchor in a moment that could have turned chaotic again. The bikers approached in a loose line, not fast this time, not teasing, their engines softened, their shadows longer, their movements unsure. As they stopped a few yards away, helmets lifted one by one. The same young leader from earlier stepped forward, but the smirk he wore before was gone. His face was pale with realization. He wasn't looking at Keanu or Sandra. He was staring at the man on the ground. What happened to him? The biker asked quietly, as if afraid of the answer. The lone rider who warned them earlier finally pulled up, cutting his engine and removing his helmet with a heavy exhale. This is what we missed, he said to his friends. This is what we rode past. Guilt rippled through the group like a sudden drop in temperature. Their earlier laughter, their bravado, their teasing, it all looked small now, tiny against the weight of what they had nearly ignored. Keanu crouched beside the man again, checking his pulse and breathing. Heat exhaustion, he said. He collapsed fixing their car. We need to get him into shade and somewhere cool fast. Sandra added softly, he's weak, but he's holding on. The woman nodded desperately, tears running down her dust-stained cheeks. If you have water, anything, please. The bikers looked at each other, and for the first time that day, not one of them hesitated. The youngest pulled a bottle from his pack and knelt beside Sandra, handing it over without a word. Another removed his jacket and held it above the man's face to block the sun. A third biked back to fetch a small portable cooler from their van parked up the trail. The desert, moments ago harsh and unforgiving, felt transformed by human hands trying to make it gentler. Sandra guided small sips of water to the man's lips, watching the slight flutter of movement beneath his eyelids. Come on, she whispered. Stay with us, you're almost okay. Keanu placed a supportive hand beneath the man's shoulders, adjusting his posture so he could breathe more easily. His expression was focused, but a softness sat behind it, the kind he never forced, the kind that appeared only when someone was vulnerable. The leader of the bikers stepped back, hands trembling faintly. We didn't know, I swear we didn't know, his voice cracked with regret. We saw them waving and we just kept going. Sandra looked up at him, not angry, not cold, but deeply human. Then do better now, she said quietly. He nodded hard, as if promising himself more than her. Within minutes, they created shade under the rocky ridge they rode past earlier. Together, they lifted the man gently, Keanu at his shoulders, Sandra supporting his neck, two bikers carrying his legs, moving in careful steps as if they had always been one team instead of strangers who began the day in conflict. Under the ridge's cool shadow, the man finally stirred. His eyelids twitched, his fingers curled weakly around Sandra's hand, and a hoarse breath escaped his lips. The woman broke into sobs of relief, pressing her forehead against her husband's arm. Keanu smiled softly, exhaustion settling into his features. He's coming back, he murmured. Sandra released a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The weight of fear slipped off her shoulders, replaced by something warmer: gratitude, connection, the quiet knowledge that small choices could shift entire outcomes. The young biker wiped his forehead, dust streaking his skin. "We'll take him to our van," he said. "Get the AC on, cool him down. We can drive them to the nearest clinic." Sandra nodded. "Thank you, that means everything." He shook his head. "No, thank you for stopping, for not being like us." But Keanu stepped forward, shaking the biker's hand with calm sincerity. "What matters is you came back." And in that moment, the desert, vast, silent, indifferent, felt like it had witnessed something rare. Strangers choosing compassion over ego, choosing responsibility over pride, choosing humanity over convenience. Sandra watched the bikers prepare to transport the couple, her heart heavier but strangely fuller. She felt Keanu move beside her, his presence steadying her once again. When the engine started up gently this time, Sandra glanced at him, her voice low after everything they had seen. "We almost weren't here," she whispered. Keanu nodded, eyes on the horizon. "Yeah, but we were." Sandra breathed deeply, letting the truth of it settle inside her. A truth that felt bigger than the desert, bigger than fear, and bigger than anything they had expected when the day began. But the day wasn't over yet. Something else waited for them, something quieter but deeper. And Sandra felt it rising in her chest as she mounted her bike again. The sun dipped lower as the bikers carefully lifted the weakened man into their van, his wife climbing in beside him with shaking hands that finally began to steady. Sandra watched them go with a soft, exhausted relief, the kind that comes only after fear has loosened its grip. The engine started, quieter this time, almost respectful. The bikers gave Keanu and Sandra a nod before driving away, carrying the couple toward help, leaving only drifting dust behind. Sandra stood still for a moment, letting the desert wind brush across her face. Everything around her felt changed, not the landscape, but the meaning inside it. Minutes ago, she had feared these riders. Minutes ago, she had been looking for calm. But the day had twisted into something deeper, something heavier, something she wasn't sure she knew how to name yet. Keanu walked up beside her, wiping the sweat and sand from his palms. There was dust on his jacket, streaks of effort on his sleeves, but his expression carried a gentleness that grounded everything. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Sandra nodded slowly. "I think I am, just processing." Keanu gave a small smile, the kind that didn't rush her. "It was a lot." She exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping her. "You think?" They both looked down the empty road where the van had disappeared. The silence that followed wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't peaceful yet, but it wasn't painful either. It felt like the space where two people stand after facing something real together. Sandra finally turned back to her bike. "I didn't expect today to turn into this." Keanu walked with her, adjusting his gloves. Unexpected doesn't always mean bad. She paused, the weight of the day settling deep into her voice. "Keanu, if we hadn't stopped when we did, if that one rider hadn't come back." Keanu cut in gently. "Sandra." She looked at him. "You followed your instinct. That's why we got here in time." Her throat tightened. It had been so long since someone reminded her that her heart, with all its softness and fear, could also be strong. She climbed onto her bike, her hands trembling not from fear now, but from the emotional gravity of the moment. Keanu started his engine, letting it idle as he watched her settle in. "You ready?" he asked. Sandra nodded, though her eyes softened with lingering vulnerability. "Ride slow for a bit." "Always," Keanu said. They eased onto the road again, the desert breeze cooler now, brushing against them like a quiet blessing. Sandra rode closer than before, the closeness not out of fear but out of something gentler: gratitude, connection, a renewed trust in the space beside her. A few minutes passed before anyone spoke. Sandra broke the silence first, her voice small but honest. "I keep thinking about how fast everything changed. One moment we were fine, the next, someone needed us." Keanu glanced at her, his tone thoughtful. "That's life. You never know when you'll be the person who shows up." Sandra looked ahead at the glowing sky, feeling something shift inside her, a kind of clarity she hadn't felt in a long time. "I'm glad we did," she whispered. "So am I," Keanu said. They rode on, the desert deepening into orange and violet hues. The day had carved something into them, something that couldn't be undone, something that wouldn't fade with the dust on their jackets. Sandra took a breath, letting it sink in. "Keanu," she said after a moment. "Ahem. I'm not the same person who started this ride." Keanu smiled behind his visor. "Good, none of us should be." The wind carried his words away across the desert, leaving Sandra with a warmth that settled deeper than the sun could reach. And as they rode into the quiet evening, she felt it clearly. What happened today hadn't just shaken them. It had changed them. The road ahead wasn't just the end of the day. It was the beginning of something entirely new. The sky had shifted into deep purples and soft amber streaks when Sandra and Keanu finally slowed their bikes near a quiet overlook. The desert stretched endlessly below them, calm again, as if it had taken a long breath after witnessing everything that unfolded. Sandra removed her helmet, the cool evening air brushing across her warm skin. She felt lighter, not because the day had been easy, but because she had carried something meaningful through it. Keanu rested his helmet on the seat and walked a few steps toward the edge of the overlook, watching the fading sun paint the sand with its final colors. For a moment, neither of them spoke, letting the quiet settle in naturally. It wasn't the silence of tension, it was the silence of understanding. Sandra joined him, standing just close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Do you ever think," she began softly, "about how easily people pass each other by? How close we all are to someone who might need help, and we just don't know it?" Keanu nodded slowly, eyes still on the horizon. "Every day, people make assumptions, or they're scared, or they don't want to get involved." He paused, then added gently, "But someone always has to be the first to stop." She absorbed his words, feeling them settle into the ache in her chest, an ache that wasn't sadness but reflection. If that biker never came back, that man might not have survived. Keanu looked at her then, really looked, eyes steady, expression open. "And if you hadn't slowed down, if you hadn't cared, we might not have stopped at all." Sandra blinked, surprised. "Me." "You felt something was wrong before anyone said it," Keanu said quietly. "Compassion is a kind of instinct too. Not everyone has it." Her breath caught at the honesty in his voice. Through all the chaos, all the dust, all the fear, she hadn't realized how much she had leaned into her own strength without noticing it. She had been scared, yes, but she hadn't frozen. She hadn't looked away. She had acted. A small smile tugged at her lips. "I guess today wasn't really about the ride." Keanu smiled back. "No, it was about who you become when the day changes." The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of cooling sand. Sandra let her eyes drift over the desert, the same desert that had frightened her, challenged her, tested her, and somehow restored her. She remembered the woman's desperate eyes, the man's weak breathing, the bikers who went from careless to compassionate, all in the span of minutes. Lives changed quietly every day, but today she had seen the shift happen up close. Keanu walked back to his bike, his movements calm, his presence grounding as always. "Ready to head back?" he asked. Sandra nodded, then hesitated. "Can we ride slower? I just want to hold on to this a little longer." Keanu's smile softened. "Yeah, we can go as slow as you want." They mounted their bikes again, engines rumbling softly in the twilight. As they rolled onto the open road, the desert wind wrapped around them like a farewell, or maybe a blessing. The stars began to prick through the darkening sky, their light gentle and patient. Sandra stayed close to Keanu, not out of fear but out of something deeper, trust, gratitude, connection. They rode in sync, two silhouettes against a vast horizon, leaving behind the place where strangers became allies, where fear became courage, where a simple desert ride became a moment neither of them would forget. Halfway down the road, Sandra spoke into the mic, her voice steady and warm. "Keanu." "Yeah, thank you for being there." Keanu didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice carried a kind of quiet truth that needed no echo. Any time. And as they disappeared slowly into the soft rising night, the desert held the memory of a day that could have broken someone, but instead healed everyone who touched it. The road narrowed into soft curves as the evening deepened, guiding Sandra and Keanu through stretches of violet and blue sky. The heat that had pressed on them all day faded into a cool, settling breeze. Their engines hummed quietly, a low heartbeat against the vastness of the desert night. It felt as if the world had slowed down just for them, not to test them this time, but to let them reflect on everything they had carried. Sandra eased her bike to a stop at a small overlook lit only by the first stars. Keanu followed, parking beside her without question, sensing she needed a moment. She removed her helmet again and closed her eyes, letting the wind wash over her. For the first time in a long time, her breath didn't feel heavy. It felt steady, real. "What are you thinking about?" Keanu asked, leaning casually against his bike. Sandra looked at him with a tired smile, one softened by depth. "How strange it is," she said. "You start the day one person and by sunset you're someone else." Keanu nodded. "That's what real days do, not the comfortable ones, the difficult ones." She breathed out, gaze drifting to the horizon. "I didn't know I'd react the way I did. I thought fear would paralyze me." "But it didn't," Keanu replied gently. "You moved, you cared, you showed courage when it mattered." Sandra lowered her eyes, surprised by the warmth in his tone. "You gave me that courage." He shook his head softly. "No, I reminded you of something you already had." Silence stretched between them, not empty, but meaningful, like the pause between two chapters of a life they didn't know was changing until now. Then Sandra said something she hadn't planned but needed to release. "I didn't think I could help anyone today. I've been so wrapped in my own worries lately. I forgot what it feels like to step outside myself." Keanu's voice softened. "That's the thing about helping someone. It reminds you who you are, not who fear tells you to be." Her chest tightened at the truth. She felt exposed and strengthened at the same time. After a moment, she turned fully toward him. "What about you? Did today change anything for you?" Keanu exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried something honest. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It reminded me that even when people make mistakes, like those bikers, they still have the potential to do the right thing. People aren't fixed in who they are." Sandra nodded, absorbing his words. "Redemption," she whispered. "And responsibility," he added. She smiled at that, the kind of smile that carried gratitude, admiration, and a quiet peace she hadn't felt at the start of the ride. They stayed there a while, watching the desert turn darker and the stars grow brighter, both of them holding the weight and gentleness of the day. The memory of the couple, the guilt of the bikers, the shared effort, the shifting fear, all of it lived in the space between them, not as heaviness, but as proof that people could rise when given the chance. Eventually, Keanu straightened, tapping his helmet. "Come on, let's get back before the night gets too cold." Sandra put hers on, then paused. "Keanu." He looked over. "Yeah." She hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of sincerity. "Thank you for not letting me fall apart today." Keanu's voice came through the mic with quiet warmth. "You didn't fall apart, Sandra. You held the whole moment together." The words settled into her like a final piece of understanding. They started their engines again, the soft rumble blending with the desert wind. Riding away, side by side, they didn't need to talk. The road carried them gently, as if proud of the people they had become by sunset. And long after their headlights faded into the night, the desert held the memory of the day. A day that began as a simple ride, turned into a test of spirit, and ended with two souls stronger than they were before. A desert ride that changed everything, not because of danger, but because of who they chose to be when the world needed them.